I'm Ariana, and I'm part of the marketing team with FLP. And today we have joining us Firearms Legal Protection, Vice President of Legal Operations to the right, Terry Johnson. And he is our awesome attorney here. And we also have another awesome attorney here with us, Dean G. Greenblatt. And he's here with Michigan as well. And they're going to be going over some of the topics over the restrictive gun laws that Congress has ordered and a few new House bills that are in place. But just make sure you submit your questions or any questions that you have down in the comment section below during the webinar, just so we can make sure we get them answered for you. And now that we have two great attorneys here with us, we're going to have some amazing feedback for your questions to all be answered. And of course, I won't be answering them, but they will. And then we're just going to pass the mic on to Terry to have us get started for today's topic. But enjoy. Thank you guys so much for joining.
Ariana, thank you so very much. And again, I want to welcome all of our FLP members and those who aren't members for joining us tonight. Thank you so very much. And again, our apologies, some technical difficulties. We were unable to, I don't know, internet went out or something, but we're glad you're here and let's get started. First, allow me to introduce my friend, Dean Greenblatt, attorney at law here in Michigan, phenomenal firearms attorney. Yes, that is Dean that you see. That's Dean prior to the beard. Dean's an outstanding attorney here. He's really been the lead attorney in a lot of major cases here in Michigan. He's the attorney for Michigan Open Carry, which is a phenomenal organization here in Michigan that really fights for the rights of people, not only to open carry, but to conceal carry and do other things. So phenomenal there. Dean is someone we in the gun community, us attorneys especially, look towards, when it comes to litigation and things along those lines. Couple cases, I'll just mention that Dean went into a little bit ago. Dean successfully sued the Secretary of State to stop, people from open carrying at the polls at the last election. And Dean's also involved in the issue in Wayne County, Michigan, where they have stopped accepting concealed pistol licenses. Other counties around here are taking a few days. The county of Wayne in Michigan is literally stopped. They're like at least a year behind. So Dean's part of that team to move things forward. But Dean, welcome. And one last thing, he's also a pilot, but don't hold that against him. All right, let's get into what we're going to talk about tonight. Some what I call some very scary bills that are being presented in Congress. One of them is what's called HR 8. Let's talk about that, Dean.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and I appreciate you and the members of FLP having an interest in this material, and we do our best to let people know what Congress is up to.
Yeah, and from what I see, again, I don't think it's a lot of things that are in the benefit, that will benefit firearms owners. But let's get into HR 8. It's my understanding with that bill, this kind of stops people from, I'm going to use the term transferring guns without the federal government getting in. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it goes beyond that. It's not just pistols. It involves firearms, period. So we're going to be talking about rifles and shotguns and everything else, things that the federal government hasn't been involved necessarily with a lot of background checks between private individuals.
So right now, under this current bill, and again, it's moved out of the House and into the Senate, right? The HR 8.
Yep, this has been passed by the House.
Okay, so if they have their way, you mean to tell me that if I want to loan you my shotgun, am I allowed to do that? I mean, we're not related, correct?
Correct.
And am I allowed to do that if this bill passes?
Yes, I just want to try out your shotgun, and because I'm going on a hunt.
Yeah, you want to go hunting next week, and take this shotgun, Dean. I've always had great luck with it.
Yeah, that's going to have to go through a NICS background check, and they have to go through a federal firearms licensee in order to process that transfer.
Well, what if I have like a concealed pistol license?
There's no exceptions for CPLs in the bill.
So you mean to tell me I can't just loan you my firearm just to go out and hunt or, I mean, here's the other thing, what if I, you like my FN57. I brag about it all the time. And Dean, take my gun, go to the range. Is that allowed?
Well, it would only be allowed if you come to the range with me and you're shooting with me. But if you just want to lend me your firearm so I can go try it out, no, we're going to have to go through a NICS check.
So, which kind of ties us into 1446 as well, because with the NICS check, currently it's a 3-day waiting period, right?
Yeah, 3 days.
At most. I mean, if there's a problem, I got to wait 3 days, right?
Yeah, there's 3 things that can happen with a NICS check. You can get a proceed, a delay, or a deny.
Okay.
And if there is a delay, they could delay for 3 days. And after the 3 days, then the FFL could proceed with a sale.
Okay.
But under 1446, we're not going to have 3 days anymore. We're going to have 10 days, and then if on a delay, and then we can object to and provide an affidavit that, look, I don't believe that there's any reason why I should be delayed. Please issue it to me. And then they'll give them another 10 days to review that. So now we're up to 20 days.
And these are working days, right? These are not like weekends. So
Right.
There's a holiday, which pretty much there's a holiday in every month. That's going to delay it, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a problem. So and even after 20 days, I mean, if they decide that they're not going to give you a proceed, because that's what an FFL would have to have in order to sell the firearm, then it's any amount of time.
So if both of these bills pass the Senate, because I believe 1446 has passed the House as well.
It's
correct?
passed the House. It's now going to go on to the Senate, and they can have a Senate version if that passes, and it goes to Joseph Biden for signature.
So, and again, this is just kind of blowing me away. If I have a neighbor who, let's say their house was just broken into, or maybe they're elderly and they don't have a gun, but they're capable of possessing a gun under federal law, these bills would actually stop them. They'd have to wait a minimum of 10 days just to get through a background check.
They would wait a minimum of 10 days if they don't get a proceed at the time of sale. The problem that we're having now is that there's, especially with a rush to buy firearms, there's because of politics and a few other reasons, there's a lot more firearm sales. So there's a lot of people that are getting delays when there's no good reason for a delay. And the FBI doesn't have to tell the FFL, and
Right.
they don't, why there's a delay. So you don't know why there's these problems with the NICS check. But if there is a delay, then you're going to be out 10 days.
Minimum.
Yeah.
Whereas today it's only 3 days if there's a delay.
Correct.
That's not helping somebody that really needs a gun. I mean, what do you think, Dean, of a situation where you've got someone who's stalking someone, or someone that has some kind of restraining order or personal protection order against them, and they need to get a gun?
Yeah, sure. So in Michigan, anyway, with the issuance of concealed pistol licenses, they allow for situations like that, and people can go and get an emergency issuance of a concealed pistol license here. But the federal bill doesn't have any accommodation for any types of emergencies. So if you're going to get you have a need, and there's an immediate need, you're not going to get a transfer from a friend or a relative, and you're going to have to go through a NICS check, and you could be delayed for 20 days or more.
Wow. So the days of loaning people guns for hunting, and again, these aren't just handguns, but hunting or anything along those lines, if these bills were to pass, that just wouldn't happen anymore.
No, not unless you're there.
So so if we're at the range, I can do this.
You can, as long as you're at the range with me. And then if somebody is having a problem where they're a threat and they have a personal protective order and they can't get a firearm, I guess you're just going to have to stay at their house and sleep on the couch.
Wow. Well, this means that you have to take me hunting now if you want to use my gun.
That's right.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay, we'll make that happen. But under this bill, there are, like I said, there are a few exceptions where you don't have to go through an FFL. Again, that's a federal firearms licensee. And if you go back to last month, we did a webinar with the FFL on, and you should look that up because some really good information there. But do you know a couple of exceptions that, you know, you don't have to go through an FFL for under this bill, this proposed bill?
Under House Resolution 8, the first bill, that's the universal background check is what they're calling it. So the exceptions would be bona fide gifts, transfers between spouses, parents to children, children's to parents, executors, NFA transfers would not go through a NICS check because they've already gone through a check at the federal level, and like we were talking about, using it at the range.
Got it.
So it'd be a gun rental at a range. You could still do that. That's under HR 8. But the problem with 8 is that when it's used in conjunction with 1446, it's really a lot more onerous.
Right. It's just, so let me ask this, Dean, if you know, and I don't know if they've even thought about this. So if I'm on a range and I don't know you, but I see you shooting a gun, I'm like, oh, that's a nice gun. Am I allowed to, and I see you smiling there, am I allowed to handle that firearm?
Not perfectly clear under this bill.
So
there's always going to be some scenario that hasn't been thought of, especially with these bills that have been bounced around in Congress for decades, and they're not well thought out.
Right.
They're not well written, and they always encounter unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences never inure to the benefit of the firearms owner, or the transferor, or the transferee.
Right. No, I'm with you there. And these two have already passed out of the House, and they're in the Senate for negotiations and potentially moving on to 1600 Pennsylvania.
That's right. They get signed. And there's some other practical effects of 8 that are problematic. And really, both of these bills, the way that they work is that they increase the costs of a transaction.
What do you mean?
Well, if we're going to engage in a transfer of a firearm that I have to you, we're going to have to seek out a federal firearms licensee to run this next check.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to pay that FFL, and it's going to be he has to be open, and he has to be able to make the call. So we both have to meet at the same location. We have to perform the NICS check. He's going to get paid for his services. So this really increased the cost. And the cost, it's a tax. It's a tax. It's a disproportionate tax on those who are frequently least able to carry that additional cost, would be people who are a little bit more poor.
You know, and that's an interesting thing, because many states here, you know, and I looked earlier of all the people that were online, and you guys were telling us where you're from, you know, Texas, Arizona, Louisiana. Again, thank you for joining us. But a lot of states, you don't have to go through an FFL or a registration process, something like we do here in Michigan, in order to sell a firearm. So now, like you said, it's not just the tax, it's the inconvenience.
Yeah, it's absolutely a problem. People have to seek out someone who can perform the NICS check.
So if you're an FFL, you might be making a lot of money, because normally, for transfers, they run it, and I can tell you anywhere from, I've seen them as low as 25, 35 bucks all the way up to 75 to 100. So
I think that $25 to $40 is typical of a minimum amount that I've ever seen, because there are some states, I can't recall if it's Washington State, where we're starting to have these types of requirements that you process the sales of firearms through an FFL. And they are charging at least $40 from everything that I've seen.
So if I wanted to buy your gun for $500, it's now $500 to you and $40 to the FFL, and
it's an 8% tax.
Wow.
On top of any other.
And of the bills that are being discussed, I hate to tell our folks out there, these two are the best bills. And I know this is
least offensive.
Least offensive. That's exactly. I mean, these two bills make it so difficult, just for law-abiding citizens like us and all of you folks who are watching, to truly just sell a firearm.
No,
but
absolutely.
Let's talk about the one that I think we both think is the ugliest of them all, which is House Bill 127. This is the I don't know, the best way to say this is for firearms owners, this is the bill from hell.
Yeah, I call it the crazy, ridiculous bill.
Yeah.
And it is more restrictive than anything that has come before it. We're talking about the Gun Control Act of 1968. We can talk about the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986.
Right.
We can talk about the National Firearms Act of 1934. Nothing even approaches how intrusive 127 is, the Sherry Jackson Lee.
Yeah, and that's for you folks who are in Texas, and I don't know how many of you are in the district where she is, but this is the person who put this forth. And again, we're not taking a position here at FLP one way or the other. Our position here is just to basically educate you and let you know, the people that are putting the bills forth. So as it relates to 127, what struck you most about this bill that, because as I look at 127 here, the big thing to me is I now would have to have a license to purchase not only firearms, but ammunition as well.
Yeah, there's 3 forms of licenses that are under this bill. And they're there's an antique firearms display license.
Right. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that even for an antique firearm, I now have to have a license?
Well, you have to have a license. You have to have insurance. We can talk about that in a minute.
We'll get to that.
And and then you have to have meet specific storage requirements. We don't know what those storage requirements are yet,
right?
But they're going to come out because the bill requires the Attorney General to come up with safe storage requirements for all firearms.
And let me ask a question. I'm sorry to interrupt. Just so everybody is clear, we don't elect the Attorney General in this country, correct?
No, the Attorney General now, Merrick Garland, who was not elevated to the Supreme Court, was nominated by Joseph Biden to be the Attorney General, and he's the Attorney General now.
So he, in essence, reports to 1600 Pennsylvania.
That's it. He's part of the executive branch, and that the Attorney General will essentially be making law, because he'll be making the regulations that we would all have to follow under this. But this bill goes beyond anything that we've seen in the UK, in New Zealand, in Australia. This is really some pretty significant and intrusive legislation here.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you talked about the antique firearm, but I want to hit the big one at the end of this, but I know there's another one that talks about military style.
So you would have to have, for example, if you have a military style firearm, and that's, the definition is always fluid with what is military style, but military style weapons license is what it is called under this bill. It's so any basically semi-automatic firearm, for the most part, would fall under military style firearm.
So wait a minute. Now you're telling me I just don't get a license for all. You're telling me there's at least 2 different categories that I'd have to apply for.
Right. There's a general license, owner licensing for firearms and ammunition. If you have a military style or semi-automatic firearms, that would be a different standard under this bill. So it'd be more restrictive or regulation regarding training.
Wait a minute. Okay, time out here. Time out. You use the word training in here.
Right. The 24-hour training course on the safe use and operation of firearms.
24 hours.
24-hour course initially. And
this is just to get a license.
Just to get the license. Well, that's not all.
This is not, but what I did notice in here, this is not just, this has nothing to do with carry.
No.
So in other words,
possession.
Just possession
of firearms, rifles, pistols, and ammunition. You cannot possess these things lest you be in prison for decades.
And we're going to talk about the penalties in a minute, but as far as I know, and I've looked at many concealed weapons classes across the country, as of today, and I could be wrong on this, Illinois has the most, I don't want to say restrictive, the most requirements for hours of training, and that's at 16.
Right.
Now, that's not to purchase. Again, that's just, I'm sorry, that's not just for purchase. That's to carry outside the home.
Right. Now, is that one time 16 hours?
I believe it's one time 16
Well,
hours.
this isn't a one time 24 hours. This is a 24 hours of training to start the process. But when you renew your license, and the license would need to be renewed every year.
Every year?
Every year for the first 5 years. Then after 5 years, you would have a 3-year license.
So 24 hours of training.
Right. That's
for 1 year.
For the first year. And then
that's 3 days. Yeah, 3 8-hour days.
Correct.
Do they talk about what's in the training at this point? Do they say
No, we'll find out about that. You have to pass the bill before you find out what's in it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So that's out there. You said at the beginning of this.
But we're not done.
There's more.
There's always more.
What do you get?
Well, we need a psychological exam. So when you apply for this license, you're going to be subjected to a psychological examination by an attorney general approved psychologist.
So it sounds like there's going to be not just the class, but it may take me months or even years to get this.
Well, no,
because again, the government's involved, and I've never seen the government do anything quickly.
Well, it better not take months or years to do this if you already have a firearm, because if you already have a firearm, you only have 3 months to get them all registered.
You use the R word, and there are a lot of people who are watching that really don't understand the R words.
Yeah.
What do you mean registered?
The make, the model, the serial number, the owner, the location for the storage of the firearm.
Whoa.
You mean to tell me that you acquired it? All those things need to be reported.
Wait a minute. You mean to tell me I have to tell the government where I store my firearms in my house?
Of course, under this bill. Yeah.
This is dangerous.
Well, this is usually what happens. Registration historically has been used to find out where the weapons are. And then after you find out where the weapons are as a government, you can come in and order their surrender. And people say, oh, this has nothing to do about confiscation. But the reality is that registration inevitably leads to confiscation.
Right, because not only do I know what you have and how to, show here's what's registered, here's what's on the list.
Right.
Now I know that it's 2 are in your bedroom, 3 might be in the basement, and you may have 1 or 2 in the garage.
That's right. But I want to talk more about your psychological exam.
So I'm nuts now is what you're telling me.
Well, somebody's nuts with this bill. So if you are subject to this psychological examination, I think it's important to talk about, especially with everybody that's watching, what it is that the psychologist is going to investigate. It's not just a conversation that a psychologist is going to have with you. It's also going to be a conversation with your spouse, if you have one, your ex-spouse.
Whoa. You mean to tell me my ex-wife, or, if your ex-husband, depending on what side, my ex has a say in whether or not I get a firearm?
Well, the ex-spouse needs to be contacted and cooperate with the psychologist to determine your suitability to possess firearms and ammunition. Oh, as well as 2 other individuals other than your spouse and your ex-spouse.
Are those other individuals family members?
Well, they can be, but if you're short on family, you can come up with other acquaintances. Yeah.
Interesting.
But that's not all. We're not done yet, because now we need to establish whether or not you have ever been diagnosed with a mental illness, not whether you've been hospitalized, which is typically the federal firearm disability disqualifier,
right?
But whether or not you've ever been diagnosed. Now, how do they know whether you've been diagnosed unless they have access to all of your medical records and history?
So if someone, which many people in this country do, suffer from depression, or let's say I've had a script for Prozac
filled,
do you think that may disqualify me under this proposed bill?
Well, we don't know what the Attorney General is going to tell psychologists about what is disqualifying and not disqualifying. They have to come up with guidelines of some kind, but I could see where any form of mental illness, including depression or perhaps any addiction, and that's specifically listed if you are addicted to any controlled substances, but now also in addition to controlled substances, if you've had any addiction to alcohol. So I suppose if you've ever had a operating a DUI or something equivalent, then that could actually be interpreted as an abuse of alcohol, which in itself is a disqualifier. Wow. And that is in the bill.
And you know, the interesting thing is, and you know, Dean, you've done cases, drunk driving cases, and I have too. And you know, some courts in this area, and I won't mention them, but some courts actually will jail you for your first DUI, no matter what, even if you're at the limit of 0.08. But I have yet to find anybody, you know, as you go through probation, as they do the 6-panel or 8-panel test, they've never come back with anybody who said you don't have a problem, because again, in some situations, it's a moneymaker for certain courts to put you on a list for DUI. And this is, but you're telling me something that happened 20, 30 years ago could stop me from having a firearm?
You know, Terry, you represented, as you mentioned, as I have DUI clients. And frequently a client will say, well, look, I don't have a problem with alcohol. And what does the judge say? Well, if you're here, you have a problem with alcohol.
Absolutely.
And well, this is going to be a basis for denial, I think, under the under 127.
Just because one night I went out and had a couple of drinks, and
right,
that's not good.
So if you have firearms now and you have this history, what happens to your firearms?
Well, you're probably not going to get a license.
You're not going to get a license, and you're going to have to dispose of these firearms in some way.
And again, that will go back to probably the government.
Right.
Well, so I also understand that according to this bill, just doing a little research myself, what happens if you have tried to commit suicide?
Yeah, that's going to be a disqualifier. That's going to be a disqualifier. That's specifically listed.
So you've got a lot of kids these days, and I'm more so referring to high school, that have had certain issues. And let me throw this out. In some states, marijuana is legal. So
yeah, but under federal law, that's a controlled substance. And if you're using marijuana, you're using a controlled substance under federal law, that's disqualifying. You're not going to get your license to possess firearms or ammunition.
So even if I had a charge of possession of marijuana or smoking marijuana, again, depending upon the state, you mean to tell me I can no longer have a firearm?
I think it goes beyond a charge. If you've never been charged and you're legally using marijuana for medicinal or recreational purposes, you're not going to be able to qualify, because controlled substances under federal law include marijuana.
So again, a lot of people in certain states can purchase a firearm from a buddy or a friend. But again, if House Bill 8 and 1446 goes through, I got to go through an FFL and I've got to check that box. Right. Because if I don't, I'm committing a federal offense by lying on the form.
5-year felony.
Yep, just by lying on the form.
Right.
And wow, this is, I see how it's all coming together here.
But there's so much more.
Well,
we're not done yet.
All right, let's go.
Because in order to get the license, we talked about the requirements for the psych exam. We talked about the training requirement, but now we need to talk about insurance.
Well, FLP.
Not that kind of insurance, Terry. I'm afraid that they're going to have to spend a little bit more money under 127.
What do you mean? Tell me what you mean by insurance.
Insurance. It's not clear that it's really insurance. It calls it, the bill calls it insurance, but what you need to do is spend $800 a year. Every year, you're going to pay $800 if you own one firearm, if you own one cartridge, if you own one shotgun shell, and you don't want to go to jail, federal penitentiary for 15 years. then you're going to need to get this license, and the license requires you to have insurance, and the insurance gets paid to the federal government, and it's $800 a year.
So, and I don't know if it's per gun or just to have the license for X amount of guns. I don't think the statute was clear, but you mean to tell me I have to pay $800 a year for the right that I'm already granted by the Constitution of the United States to possess a firearm?
I would say the right existed before the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees it, but absolutely $800 a year. It's just a slight infringement.
Let me ask this. Can you think of any other right where you have to pay money to exercise that right?
No. And, I think that it's in the news today about the possibility of court packing. The interpretation of the Constitution is left to the Supreme Court without getting too far afield with politics.
Someone I think Eric just said something there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the interpretation of what is an infringement, I think, will come down to a Supreme Court interpretation if this were to ever pass. But I'm hopeful that it won't. I think it'd be, like I say, a generational change. And the penalties on this are so draconian.
Yeah, and that's something else I noticed. But let me go back for a minute. Before we go there, I want to go back to this $800, right? So what is this for? This is just for me to, does this get paid out to someone? Do you know what they do with this money?
Well, it's not clear, except that the money's going to the federal government.
$800 a person
per year.
So right now, and I haven't done this math, but there is 30 million guns or something, probably more. Say 400 million guns. Multiply that by $800. And I want you folks out there to think about this. Think of every firearm that you having to pay. And I don't know if it's every firearm, but you having to pay $800 a year. That's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
And now let's talk about these penalties.
Yeah, the penalties, there are fines, and then there's incarceration. What's really interesting about this bill is it sets forth a minimum. So in other words, it's not left to the discretion of a judge in a criminal prosecution for violating this particular law, if it becomes law.
Well, so for example, you hear a lot of people say, well, he can get up to 15 years in jail.
Right.
So, but that doesn't mean that the person's gonna go to jail under normal circumstances.
Right. Maybe they get probation. Maybe they go for 6 months or 18 months, and then they're on parole or probation.
But there's a maximum sentence. But what you're saying here is there's a minimum sentence?
A mandatory minimum sentence for violating a lot of the provisions in this law.
Let's talk about a few of them.
Yeah. So we have a minimum incarceration for general violations of 15 years. And a fine of 7.
Maximum of 15.
No, minimum of 15, maximum of 25.
Wait a minute. So you tell me, if I don't get a license, if I don't pay $800,
and you possess one 9mm cartridge.
Yeah, because ammunition has got to be registered under this too, right?
That's right.
Now I know we've got some members in California, and I think some of you are used to, I'm going to say, registering your ammunition. The rest of the country isn't used to that.
Right. Or at least go through a background check in order to acquire the ammunition. And there aren't any mail order sales of ammunition in California.
Right. But you're telling me right now I can go to jail between a minimum of 15 years.
You will go to federal penitentiary for 15 years, the way this bill is written, at a minimum.
If I just possess a gun or ammunition and I don't have this license.
Right. And if you're age 70, I guess it's a life sentence for most people.
Wow. 15 years. And you said there was a fine with that?
Yeah, that's a minimum of $75,000. It can go up to $150,000. That's the minimum and the maximum.
So, wait a minute. Wait. So that's a must as well? That's a shall?
$75,000.
So I can get 15 years in prison and be ordered to pay $75,000.
Right.
Not or.
They can get it out of your Social Security if you're old enough when you're still get out.
Or, again, it's the federal government. They've got this arm called the IRS, and they could probably seize your property to
Right.
make this happen.
But I mean, these are the lesser penalties associated with the bill. They do get a little bit more
Lesser.
right? Because if the firearm is, say, you have a firearm in your home, and a family member or a friend were to get a hold of it and commit suicide with that firearm,
Yeah.
well, now that's a violation, and that would be a minimum of 25 years incarceration in a federal penitentiary.
Because someone else did something illegal by using my gun.
Yes.
I'm going to prison for 25 years.
Yeah, at a minimum, it could be up to 40. And it's a minimum fine of 100,000 in that case. So the fine goes up a little bit.
Because someone else broke the law.
Right. If the person who got hold of the firearm uses it in a crime or to commit suicide. Yes.
So and I'm just telling you how crazy this sounds. Someone breaks into my house.
Well, I said it's the crazy, ridiculous bill.
Yeah, but it's just, so a criminal can break into my house and get my firearm, because let's say maybe I left it on the, I don't know, I left it on top of the table in my dining room.
Yeah. Well, it's not clear if it's a stolen firearm from you. I imagine they're going to get you for violating the safe storage requirement. In that case, they'll probably come up with regulations associated with that. But it's for a transfer of the firearm.
But the problem is the criminal is going to get less time for taking and stealing my gun and shooting someone than I would get for lawfully owning it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a couple other neat things in here. It does have the ban on mags holding more than 10 rounds. That's
Whoa.
very popular.
That's in there too?
That's in there. And then we also have a ban on 50 caliber ammunition or larger. So your 50 Beowulf or BMG, all those calibers would be illegal. And the penalty for possessing those then would be a minimum of 10 years in the federal penitentiary, up to 20, and a minimum fine of 50 up to 100,000.
Sounds like they're going to either going to clear the guns, everybody's guns, or they're going to build more penitentiaries. I don't know which one, because first of all, 10 rounds, and what I've also found out about this bill is you have to register your mags. Is that right?
Well, so we were talking about House Resolution 8, 1446, and now 127, which is the crazy, ridiculous one. But there was another bill that was dropped last night, and it doesn't have a number yet. It's from Senator Menendez.
It doesn't even have a number. That's the scary thing. That's really out there. It
doesn't have a number. It just says Senate. They leave it blank. They'll fill it in later. And this is another magazine ban bill. It does grandfather in possession of mags that were possessed prior to enactment, but all mags sold after the law have to be marked now with a serial number. And it's a 5-year felony for anyone who possesses a mag that holds more than 10 rounds that wasn't possessed before enactment, or imported one. And yeah, that's a pretty draconian a penalty as well. And it does provide, of course, for a mag buyback. So you can turn in your mags that hold more than 10 rounds to the government.
Dean, all I can do is laugh here.
Yeah.
All I can do is laugh. Before we take some questions, there's a couple things I want to throw out. Again, I want to say thank you all for watching this. But I'm going to ask you a couple of things, some things I want you to think about from an education standpoint and a coverage standpoint. Firearms Legal Protection is here for you. One of the things that we didn't really get into is some of the things that the gentleman at 1600 Pennsylvania has proposed, which is a national red flag law. Those of you, I believe right now we're up to about 20 out of the 50 states that have red flag laws, and they're all different. And those of our members who are down in Florida, you know it's going to be, you know what it's like down there. They have more red flag cases than all the other states combined. And just a little side note, we're going to be doing a seminar in Jacksonville on red flag this Tuesday at the Hyatt place near the Jacksonville airport. So if you're around in the Jacksonville area, we'd love to have you there. Go to our website or, contact us about more details there. But when things like this come out, we at Firearms Legal Protection try to make sure, one, that you're educated, and two, that you're protected. And, we want to bring you information like this. And you see right above see if I can get it. I think I'm right above it here where it says webinar discount. Please click on that. And I'm saying please for a couple of different reasons. We want to make sure that you are protected as these laws start to roll out, because we're going to tell you, if these bills get through, things are really going to be very difficult for gun owners. And you need to not only be educated, you need to be protected as well. And by joining us tonight, thank you, Plenty, for putting that up. Joining us tonight, you see our normal prices there. We've redlined those, and we've gone with a discounted price for you just by watching this seminar tonight. And, you click on that, you'll get our discount. And all of our plans include red flag. And all of our plans include a hotline that's answered by an attorney 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, should an emergency rise, whether it's in the middle of the night, early in the afternoon, or late in the evening. Firearms Legal Protection is there for you. We've got the best criminal defense attorneys out there. We've got the best civil attorneys for you. And we're one of the only companies that offers red flag coverage in all of our plans at no additional pricing. So make sure you click on that, check us out. And again, we're going to have more topics and things like this as time goes on. But we're going to take a few questions right now. And am I turning this back to you, Ariana, or how are we going to do the questions? I'm sorry. We're looking around. Okay. Oh, well, someone said something about trade the Michigan State helmet that is above behind Dean for a U of M helmet. No. We're both go white. There you go. So that's a no. All right. Let's take a few questions, Ariana. We've got some time here.
All right. Sorry, it's taking a second to load. I was just getting goosebumps listening to you guys. I was just like, ugh. But you guys have some great topics up on here that you guys are talking about. But okay, so the first question that we have up, how can HR 8 be enforced?
That's a great question. I mean, here's the interesting part of it. If there isn't I would assume if there isn't a paper trail, how you get a certain firearm in your possession, that could be a huge way that they can enforce that. So again, it's John bought it today, 6 months from now, he sold it to Steve. 3 months from then, he sold it to Mary, and Mary sold it to Sue. And you look on here, and Sue never filled out the paperwork. Sue and Mary could both be in trouble there.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points here. When you have universal background checks on all firearms, the information about those firearms is retained, and there's been some bills before to try to limit that information, but there's no way for us to audit it and determine what information is retained by the federal government. But if it's universal and it applies to everybody and in private transfers, these firearms are going to be traceable in the future. So more and more firearms will be of record.
Yep. And there's one up here. Loan is the same as transfer. Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a legal term of art there. This is my pen here. If Dean wants to write something down, I have just transferred my pen to him.
Right. The other point I wanted to make is that the bills that don't seem that bad, 8, at least less intrusive, obviously, than 127, but 8 and 1446 and 127, if they all pass, then they're going to know exactly what you have everywhere and everyone.
Right.
If you're in compliance with the law.
Exactly. And someone posted, about the courts. You can't trust the courts. But I can say this as a criminal defense attorney. You never want to put something in the hands of a judge. You want to take care of it beforehand. And how do you do that? You contact your legislators to make sure that things like this don't get any further.
No, definitely.
All right. So the next question, what about transfer between siblings?
Yeah, I don't want to state anything. The way that I'm reading it right now, not every possible transfer between family members is included. So we have parents and children, but I'm not certain about siblings yet. Not everything in these bills is nailed down well enough that you can get a solid answer before they get passed.
Right. Our next question, firearm transfers before HB 8 or HB 1446 go into law. Anything we should be concerned about?
All of it.
All of it.
I want you to think, especially if you're in a state like Texas, which is obviously where our home office is located, you can sell a firearm to anyone as long as that person is legally allowed to possess that firearm. Right now, if these were to go into effect, as Dean mentioned, you got to go through FFLs, and that's the only way to legally do it, with only a few exceptions in there.
Right. So our next question, what happened to firearms we already owned or grandfathered?
Yeah, they're not specifically firearm ban bills, although they certainly have that effect.
Right.
But if 127 got in and you already own firearms, your possession isn't grandfathered. You still have 90 days, 3 months, in which to go get a possession license. And if you don't have that, then you're possessing firearms contrary to law.
And what's the penalties again?
Well, 20-year minimum or 15-year minimum.
15-year minimum.
Right. What's 5 years?
Yeah, and here's the other part. What if you don't have $800, kind of like you said before?
Well, then you're possessing them without a license. You cannot get the license without the mandated federal insurance.
And the 24-hour training.
Initial 24-hour training. The training after that is, I think, for military-style firearms, it's once every 2 years with an additional 8 hours. If it's not military style and it's just a regular firearm and ammunition possession license, then it would be 8 hours. You would have to show that you had 8 hours within the previous 3 years.
But let me ask you this, Dean, just something just crossed my mind. So before I can carry with a permit outside my home in the states that require it, before I can constitutionally carry in the states that don't require it, I first have got to go through this federal system before I can even get a firearm. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're going to go through a NICS check, no matter where you get the firearm from, no matter if it's a rifle or a pistol. You're going to have to...
Shotgun too?
Well, you're not going to be able to buy ammunition for anything unless you have a license.
Got it. So I might have a gun, but I can't shoot anybody.
Well,
I can throw it at them.
Well,
because I can't get a license.
Well, you can't possess the firearm.
Yeah, good point.
So you're just throwing air.
Got it.
All right. So our next question is going to be, how can I leave my handgun to my daughter when I pass? Will these transfer bills affect that?
127 certainly will. 127, your daughter would have to obtain a license to possess the firearm and pay the $800, take the course, the training course, go through the psychological background checks, have the spouse and ex-spouses interviewed, have 2 other family members interviewed. I feel dirty just talking about this.
Yeah, it's intrusive.
Just reading it is animal farm.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to throw out. You're bearing your soul to the government just to possess.
Right.
Again, that's I want everybody to fully understand this. Possess, not carry, just to have in your home, which Heller kind of got into.
Well, Heller can get modified, if we have an extra,
2 or
4
3
justices.
Yeah.
Well, the current bill is to add an additional 4, pack another 4 in there, so we'd have 13 justices.
And they can do whatever they want to do.
Well, they can reinterpret whether or not 127 passes constitutional muster.
So much for stare decisis, huh? Sanctuary states. I'm sorry, Ariana. Go ahead.
You're good. Yeah, so sanctuary states, will that have any effect on these bills, and can they stop them?
I don't think they would, because it's a federal law. It's not like a sanctuary city, because again, you can't possess it. It's a federal law, and again, federal law trumps everything.
Well, the sanctuary state movement is really an effort by states to say, we're not going to subsidize enforcement of federal firearm laws. We're not going to send out our state patrol. We're not going to send out our county sheriff to enforce these onerous federal regulations. It doesn't say that the federal government can't come to your door with ATF and FBI agents and seize your firearms when you don't get your license to possess within 3 months.
Yeah.
So it's not going to protect people from federal law enforcement.
All right. Well, on this next question, it's going to be about on HR 127. Does LTC or CCW cover this license, or is this something additional?
This is additional.
Additional, over and above. This is just a half. You want to carry in your state. You have, and again, I'm assuming this is the way it's going to go. You first have, before you can go into an LTC class or your CCW class, whatever it's called in your state, you first will probably have to show them some kind of proof that you have actually gone through the first class, or I'm sorry, the 24-hour training,
right,
and then be able to take that. And that's the only way you're going to be able to take it outside of the house. But it's probably way more, it's going to make it more complicated.
Can Hipaa protect people from disclosing mental issues used to grab guns from people?
It's a common misconception. Hipaa doesn't have anything to do with the government. Hipaa is a restriction on medical care providers and the information that they can provide other people. But Hipaa is not going to protect anybody from those records going to the federal government.
A psych exam, isn't that being made a witness against oneself?
No, you don't have to participate, but then you're not getting a license.
Right.
After all, we're now converting a right to a privilege.
Our next question is, as ridiculous as this sounds, what is the likelihood that all this can pass?
Well, I'll give, again, let me say this. Right now, the Senate is 50-50. And if it goes just along party lines, you've got a tie. The folks at 1600 Pennsylvania get to break that tie. So you would need somebody from one party to break ranks one way or the other.
And this is where you pay attention to the news and you listen to explanations about what the filibuster is and the efforts to get rid of the filibuster. And yeah, this is an important example of why that might be really, really important.
Yeah, and they listen. That people were told this, that these things were coming, and this should not be a surprise to anybody. No. Elections have consequences.
Our next question is there any chance the Supreme Court will intervene against these bills if they pass?
Well, no, in order for the Supreme Court, they're not going to intervene. So you've got to go to the court, and you have to bring
actual case or controversy.
Yeah, and if you're not doing that, and again, it takes a long while from things to get from point A, which is a case or controversy, all the way to the Supreme Court. It takes years. for that to happen. So imagine what can happen if this went into effect tomorrow. It would be a long time.
A long time. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Call your senators and representatives.
Yep. How can we stop this? Call your federal U.S. Congress people, your state, your House of Rep folks, your state, your U.S. senators. If you want it stopped, that's what you have to do.
And 127, the Sherry Jackson Lee bill, has been assigned, unlike the other bills, except for the Menendez Senate bill. Those have been passed. 127 hasn't been passed yet. It's been referred to the Committee on the Judiciary in the House of Representatives. That House of Representatives committee is chaired by Gerald Nadler of New York, and Gerald Nadler of New York is the individual that just threw out the court packing bill to add an additional 4 justices to the Supreme Court. So it's a very dangerous time. It's a very dangerous time for firearm owners, and it's a very dangerous time for those that want to possess a firearm for their own self-protection, for sure.
All right. So this person's saying, yeah, so buy magazines now.
Well, you can buy Time, Newsweek, any of the magazines you want. But if this bill were to pass, your magazines that, hold cartridges, they're going to probably have to be registered.
Yeah, they'll have a serial number, they'll be registered, and they won't hold more than 10 rounds.
All right. So will pistol stabilizing braces become illegal to own or use?
Let me just make one other comment on the previous question that was asked. One thing, if you have those in your possession, just going back to my notes here, that's a 10 to 20 year felony, as Dean mentioned earlier, and you have to do a mandatory 10 years and pay a minimum fee of $50,000. So think about that as you move forward. But I'm sorry, Dean, you want to handle this one?
Will pistol stabilizing braces become illegal to own or use? Well, it's certainly an effort by the current administration to have ATF evaluate their definition of what constitutes a stabilizing brace. It is entirely possible that a definitional change is coming. That certainly happened with bump stocks. So
yeah,
it's not, and bump stock reinterpretation came under President Trump. So your rights and the definition of what is legal and illegal changes from administration to administration.
All right. After 10 days, is the resubmission automatic, or is the individual required to submit written request in?
It's required that if you have been delayed under 1446, you get after 10 days, you have to submit an affidavit saying that you don't believe that you are, there's any reason why you should be denied the acquisition of a new firearm. You're not under any federal firearm disabilities.
Right.
And that's your obligation. It's not the obligation of the government to prove anything. You have to disprove it.
Right. And think of it this way, they're not going to do anything to make it easier for you to get a firearm. We got time for about 2 more. I know we started a little late, but we got time for about 2 or 3 more. So
yeah, we'll have like about 1 or 2 more. So this next one is, how is HB going to make the crackhead selling stolen guns have his gangbanger customer go through a background check?
Yeah, this law is not for the gangbanger. This law is for you. If you're watching this video, it's because you are a law-abiding citizen and you want to stay that way, and you're concerned about your liberty. And gangbangers aren't the least bit interested. They don't have to follow the law. They wouldn't have to admit that they're not following the law. They wouldn't have to report. If they're a gangbanger, they don't have to make a report. It violate their Fifth Amendment privilege.
Yeah. And one thing, I was just thinking about this from a police officer standpoint, and I'm looking at the exceptions in here. One thing I didn't notice as a police officer exception. So what happens if you and I, let's say we're, both police officers, something happens, my gun's out of rounds, you're shot. Under this one, if I pick up your gun and shoot at somebody to defend myself, I have now, illegally, I got a gun that I shouldn't have.
Right. There's some exceptions under the registration and the background checks for law enforcement, but no, there's the scenario you're giving. There isn't.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
All right. So I think that was the last question.
Standing.
Yeah. Did you guys want to have anything else you guys wanted to touch up on, or we?
Dean?
No, I think we're like I say, I feel dirty talking about these things, and if they do pass, it'll be a new world order for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you, Dean Greenblatt, Attorney Dean Greenblatt, my friend, for coming on and sharing your knowledge with all of us here at Firearms Legal Protection. We appreciate you. Love to have you back at some point.
Oh, I'd love to do it.
And those of you here in Michigan, you already know Dean and the great work he's done. I just want to say again, thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks again for being a mentor to me in many ways as well.